Okay, very good day to everyone. We're on to a set of new videos this week. I've only managed to get one video out for the week, but over the next few days, hopefully things will be back to normal where I can churn out 3 videos and give you guys a heads up on what's actually coming out. I think about 4 to 5 days before the actual video arrives. We are at the 70th episode for Growing Your Tree of Prosperity today. We've done quite a lot of work. Now we have over 2,000 subscribers. The monetization progress has begun. Thank you very much to the people that has been supporting this channel. All right. The beauty about monetization is that I'm able to fight off the need to actually get a sponsor. So you can get material that is as truthful to the ground as possible, right? Without any fear or favor. And so today, the topic that we're going to talk about is the topic of geo-arbitrage, right? And this is something which I think I found a lot of very successful content creators in Singapore. And one of them, who is actually an ERM student of mine, actually has very successfully transitioned into Taiwan, and she's talking about the process of settling down. And I think that's a very, very successful channel. Not too difficult for you to figure out who that influencer is. She's doing very well and her numbers are very good. I'm very envious of the views that she's getting. Okay. So I've decided to do something to complement the material here. Okay. But before I begin, I just want to say that I'm not a quitter. I'm actually like a toad in a well. I've been in Singapore all my life, working, studying. All right, so I've not spent a lot of time overseas and getting the kind of cosmopolitan experiences that many other Singaporeans have. All right, so there's a lot of deep envy. Okay, but for me, I think that in my 20s, I have to admit I've thought a lot about quitting Singapore when I was much younger, because I think a very prominent politician said that people who leave the country are quitters. Okay, and before 2011, I can even venture to say that Singapore is a very unhappy place. Like most of us who are engineers, who are working during that period in the early 2000s, we're constantly unhappy. Why? There was a competitive workplace. We are always fighting off people from other countries who are cheaper than us. Okay, and to do that, we constantly need to upgrade. So before WSG and Skills Futures, I'm always getting my Microsoft certifications, but that's not enough. I have to get my Cisco, my Unix certifications, and I spend the bulk of that doing it after office hours, right? So even though work-life balance was very good. Now, on top of it, there were reservist liabilities, going back to camp, and my fellow reservists, they're also very unhappy, right? They have to be disrupted from their work to defend the country, and then the foreigners can just come in and do whatever they want. So that was a very angsty period in my life. Okay, but I think all of you have gone through it, right? I don't have to talk very much about that, right? Yeah, but for me, on top of it, I found the dating environment very tough because maybe I don't have a lot of experience. I was an engineering undergrad, so I only had like 1 or 2 casual dates during my undergraduate days. So today I would be called an incel, right? I'll be called an incel. I'll do a future video on life of an incel, okay? And we will summarize some of the thought leadership in the incel world. But I would be considered an incel in my 20s, right? Before I met my wife. And then on top of it, I was slowly developing Graves' disease, right? Hyperactive thyroid, where my thyroid glands would overproduce these hormones, making me quite short-tempered but also very aggressive. Okay, didn't affect my career. I think companies sort of like that kind of working attitude. Okay, so for me, I think figuring out how to invest in dividends saved my life, gave me motivation to work harder, because now the money that I earn had a purpose, and the purpose is to make more money. Right, and actually, you know, at the grander scheme of things, because Singapore is so kind to investors, I would even dare to say, and some opposition supporters would be upset to hear this, investing in dividends made me love my country a lot more. Okay, yeah, so that history where I would used to go to the young PAP BBS and I tell people to quit the country, you know, as a troll, it has somewhat influenced me even today as an investment trainer. And I've always been very obsessed when Tim Ferriss in the 4 Hour Work Week, he sort of popularized the term geo-arbitrage. And so what is that? So that is the practice of earning income in a high-cost economy while living or spending in a low-cost economy. So allowing you to maximize your purchasing power. And how do you do that? For example, if you have a good employment contract in Singapore, and you just needed to deliver to your boss. Maybe your boss is a very nice SME boss. Then you can spend and live in a low-cost economy like Malaysia, right? You can relocate to JB, maybe rent a very cheap unit there, and experience a lower cost of living. Okay, so that is in essence geo-arbitrage. And somehow Singapore is now a very, very good place for geo-arbitrage because the cost of living in Singapore is so high, but the cost of living in Malaysia is so low. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that all I have to do is to earn in Singapore and spend in Malaysia. Then I effectively get to be like what a lot of Malaysian Chinese they get to enjoy. All right, even though half my family is Malaysian Chinese, and if you really understand, like for me, my family is like that. You understand that all they want is a fair shot at life. So a lot of them will happily give up their citizenships to become Singaporeans. Okay, so yeah, and I'm also very aware of the kind of struggles that they have. You know, Malaysian Chinese live their life in hard mode. All right, for Singaporeans, I would still say that we're living in easy mode. Okay, so where I fit in, all right, as a trainer, is that I encourage my students to find some way of hybridizing the FIRE movement with geo-arbitrage. Okay, and there are many valid reasons for doing so. Without dividend taxes, Singaporeans can earn dividends locally and then spend them in a foreign country, right? So the question is, which jurisdictions are therefore the best place to conduct geo-arbitrage? Okay, so what I teach my students is that if your passive income can cover all your expenses in a target country, then you can lie flat in that country, right? You can literally go to China if the authorities allow you to. You know you can tang ping, you can bai lan, as much as you want, right? You can lie flat, okay, and do nothing. Okay. Now, do take note that in all the exercises I do, I tell my students that you're not likely to localize immediately. So you need to research expat expenses in the target country, which could be 3 to 4 times more than what a local spends every month. Okay, so they need to do that. Okay, and if your income is insufficient, your passive income is insufficient, you might even have to take on some remote work, which is ideal. Okay, or perhaps you can take on any job in your host country. All right, and so this is what happens every time I conduct an early retirement masterclass. We do a case study of someone with $500,000 worth of assets in Singapore. And I get my students to talk about a dream country that they want to emigrate to, and then calculate whether they can experience a decent kind of lifestyle in their target country. Okay, so the latest batch of students, which is my 39th batch, I've got students who want to emigrate to Perth, to KL, to Bangkok, to Toronto, and Taipei, right? And likely Taipei is, I suspect the students suggested it because it's now a very hot place to go, right? Maybe Taiwan is more tolerant towards sexual minorities, perhaps I would expect, or it's just a more laid back kind of place that's culturally very similar to Singapore. Okay, and for that particular batch of students, they were able to craft a portfolio that generated 6.39%, which is quite usual in the current market climate like this. Okay, so $500,000 multiplied by 0.0639, it's about close to $32,000, right? And then my students are then made to project the annual expenses for an expat, right? So that exercise is a little bit more complicated than just a simple Google, or now these days we can use ChatGPT to get the answer. But I normally get them to look at their annual expenses, convert it to Singapore dollars on an annual basis, and always factor a single room apartment into the annual expenses, because the person is going on their own. It's a single person that's doing the emigration. So these are the numbers that I came out with after a 1 hour exercise. All right, and we find that well, if you go to Australia or Toronto, very obviously you need to work, right? These are very high tax jurisdictions. I would say standard of living is considered on the high side, and you go to Australia and Canada to, I would suppose, uh, have better work-life balance, right? Have better work-life balance, but you still need to work. Okay, so if you are, for example, a nurse and you want to relocate to a place like Australia, right? Your likely the standard of living might go up a little bit, right? But of course, you get to spend more time at home with your family and kids. Okay, and these are the numbers that my students managed to get, right? In the case of Malaysia and Thailand, and surprisingly Taipei, okay, and please double check my students' numbers. The work is done by them. Uh, $32,000 in passive income every year in Singapore can completely fund an expat lifestyle, right? With a one-room apartment in these three jurisdictions, right? So Malaysia, we know that it is probably something very feasible. I've done this exercise many times. In Thailand, I am aware that Thailand is not as cheap as before, right? There is a lot of videos on social media, and you can go through them on YouTube that talks about living in Thailand, some of the struggles that the expatriates have. Okay, but the big surprise for me is that somehow that can work in Taipei. So please double check my numbers. Taipei is the first time I've incorporated this into my program at a special request of one student. And I said, okay, why not? Let's look at living in Taipei, right? I didn't pick Hualien or maybe a second tier town. I said, let's stick with Taipei, and I was really surprised when it's $26,000 a month. Okay, all right. So those who are actually living in Taipei, please share your numbers with us so that we will know whether these numbers are feasible. Okay, so that's probably the best thing I can do. I could get the students to dig out the numbers and explain on a spreadsheet. But obviously, there are a lot more considerations when you're trying to go to another country. And given that we are so close to Malaysia, I thought I'd just spend one slide talking about the Malaysia My Second Home scheme. And because we now have a second special economic zone with Malaysia, the rules have actually been softened. Okay, so you get some sort of a permit to live in Malaysia for 5 to 10 years that is renewable. Okay, and the option gives a lower cost route. For if you're over 50 years old, the amount of fixed deposit you need in Malaysia is sort of halved, right? It's about 32,000 rather than 65,000 US dollars. So you need to be age 21. You need to have a fixed deposit of about 65,000 US dollars if you're below the age of 50. Okay, that is very strict because the money will be in a fixed deposit in Malaysia. So I'm not sure whether they require it to be Malaysian ringgit, right? If it is, then you have to deal with currency fluctuations. Okay, and here's this: you must buy a property and hold it in a specially designated zone. Okay, so all in all, right, it's not a question of just finding out whether it's cheap to live in Malaysia. There are a lot of individual requirements within a country to make sure that you're solvent, such that I expect for Singaporeans who want to relocate to Malaysia, you might need about 400,000 Singapore dollars on standby to be invested into Malaysia, while the rest of the portfolio would generate the dividend incomes for you. Okay, so it's really not as simple as a mental exercise that I make my students do. Okay, so always be available to research the details of the country that you want to relocate to. Okay. All right, so here's another case study which is a little bit negative, right? Because when preparing for this set of slides, I saw some videos about expatriates in Thailand complaining that some bank accounts are getting frozen, okay? And they are speculating that this is likely because of the drive to fight money mules in the country. So they have the same problem in Thailand like in Singapore, where people are using the bank accounts of some innocents to transport and move money around, okay? Yeah, but on top of it, we've always heard stories about US expats running out of money in Phuket, So you need to manage your financial costs, right? So in the beginning, they say that, okay, I can live like a king in Phuket, but the cost of living in Thailand is rising very quickly. So during the pandemic, things started to escalate. And these people ended up being very poor in their adopted country. Okay, and making things worse, if you suffer a medical emergency, a simple medical mishap, you can lead a person to run out of money in the foreign land. Okay, all right. So some useful issues to consider. Okay, Singapore is very broke. Very broke. Is actually not very bureaucratic. We have a smooth bureaucracy, and we are highly digitalized. So when you transition to a country that is more laid back, you have to deal with slower and more analog systems. Okay, and that can create a lot of stress, a lot of unhappiness uh, for at least maybe the first 2 to 3 months when you are in your host country, and you need to sort of have an attitude adjustment when you go in. And I can't capture that in an investment course, but it's something that I think you should be encouraged to do, to follow some of these content creators on social media. I mean, at the psychological level, I think they really paint a very accurate picture of what you really need to think about, right, when you're settling down in the foreign country. And I can tell you, I'm really envious that people have gone through this process, right? That I'm unable to do that, right? My frustration is obviously different because I've chosen to stay. Okay, so you have to deal with currency fluctuations. Okay, if the currency strengthens against your home currency, then you've got a problem. I think for Singaporeans, this is not a very big consideration, okay, given how strong our currency is. Okay, but tax complexities across jurisdictions is something you need to think about. Like in America, they tax citizens who make money outside the country through the FATCA regulations, right? And some of the content I read when I researched for this video, they say that maybe one day UK might do the same, because there's a very serious fiscal imbalance in the United Kingdom, and they really need to have more taxpayers. Okay, and finally, you need to research your visa, your residential, okay, and most importantly, how are you going to continue to have access to quality healthcare in your country? Okay, so all these things need to be taken into consideration. It's a very, very long kind of mental exercise. Okay, so for folks who want to learn a little bit more, in fact, on the day of the launch of this video, this evening, I have a preview to my early retirement masterclass. Google ERM intro, click onto the first link, and you can come in to know a little bit more about my story and ask some questions about the financial markets. All right. And so with that, enjoy the rest of your week, and I hope to be able to generate more content for you. Thank you very much.